Today, let's look at how to create dynamic lists which depend on one another. For example, let's say we have a company with 3 divisions: aerospace, medical, and food. Within each division, the company has several segments. In aerospace, they have the satellite segment, human spaceflight, rideshare, etc. We'd like to create 2 dropdowns. One dropdown where the user can select a division. So it'll be those 3 divisions we saw before. Once the user has selected a division, we would like the second dropdown, the segments dropdown, to change depending on which division has been selected. So rather than listing out every segment in the company, when I click this dropdown, I would like to only see the segments within the selected division. So we've selected the medical division. When I click this dropdown, I should see only the segments within medical. And you can see that's how we've set this spreadsheet up. If I go back and select aerospace rather than medical, you'll see that when I next click on the segment dropdown menu, I'm only seeing the segments within the aerospace division. So in a moment, I'll go to a version of this spreadsheet where these dropdowns aren't set up, and we'll go step by step through how to get them working this way. And as always, if you'd like to follow along with the example, click the link in the description to download a copy of this example file. And just to provide some context on where you might use this in the real world, we've set up a small budgeting tool here, the sort of thing that you might use in the finance world. In this example, we have an input sheet where a user can list out various purchases they plan to make in 2021. For example, we might say that in the aerospace division for the satellite segment, in April, we plan to spend some money, let's say $1 million, on raw materials. This feeds into a summary tab that shows us how much we plan to spend by segment, by division next year. So you can see our $1 million to support satellites listed there under April. The dynamic dropdowns in the division and segment columns help to ensure that users are only inputting spend to actual segments and actual divisions. By limiting the segment column based off the division selection, it helps guide those choices and makes things a little bit easier for the user. So you can play around with the logic that summarizes everything on the summary tab, but the focus of this tutorial will be on setting up those dropdowns. First, let's set up the division dropdown. To do that, we need to have a list somewhere that lists out the 3 divisions. Usually, if I'm going to have multiple lists used in a workbook, I'll create a tab simply called Lists. If you navigate to the Lists tab, you'll see we already have one list, and that's the list of months. This is used for the timing dropdown, where a user can indicate which month the spend is going to take place within. If we go back to the Lists tab, we are going to first create a divisions list. So over here in cell E6, just type divisions. I'll bold that for now, and then list out the 3 divisions. We already have them written out on the summary tab, so I'll go ahead and copy and paste them from there. I'll click on the summary tab, click on aerospace, and then while holding the control key, I'll click medical, and I'll continue to hold the control key, then click food. Holding the control key means that as I click on different cells, they'll be added to my current selection. I've now selected those 3 divisions. I'll press Control C to copy them, or you can right click and click copy. And then I'll navigate back to the lists tab and just paste beneath the divisions column. And I'm going to press Control B just to unbold them, just to keep consistent formatting, where the header is bold and everything listed under the header is not bold. Now that we have our list, let's go back to the Input tab and put this into our dropdown. First, select all the cells where you'd like to create a dropdown menu. In this case, we want to select all the cells under the division column on the Input tab. I'll do that by selecting cell C6, and then I'll scroll down to the bottom of the spreadsheet, and while holding down the Shift key, I'll click on cell C30. When you hold down Shift and select 2 cells, Excel will select the first cell, the last cell, and all the cells in between. Now with all of those cells selected, I'll navigate to the Data tab on the ribbon, and then click Data Validation, this button right here. By the way, you can also get to data validation using a keyboard shortcut, Alt-A-V-V. Right now, under Allow, by default, Excel will have any value, which means that the user can enter any value they'd like into these cells. We would like to have a dropdown or a list, so click the dropdown here and select List. Under Source, we need to tell Excel which options can the user select from. Click on the text box underneath Source, and then click this button here to the right. Navigate to the Lists tab and select the 3 divisions. Then you can click this button here to save your selection. Then press OK. Now, if you click on any cell in the division column, you'll see this arrow pop up, which you can click to see the dropdown, and you'll see that all 3 divisions are available as an option. By the way, data validations can also be done with a named range. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second, because we'll have to use named ranges when we get to the segment column. Navigate back to the Lists tab. We want to create a named range called Divisions, which refers to our 3 divisions. The easiest way to create a named range is to select the range you'd like to name, and then in the upper left corner, simply type in the name. In this case, we want to call this range Divisions. If you're unfamiliar with named ranges, all it means is you've created a shorthand to refer to a range of cells. Previously, if we wanted to refer to this range of cells, it would look like this. Lists E7 through E9. We are essentially giving Excel directions to find those cells. However, now that we've named the range, rather than equals lists E7 through E9, in our data validation window, under Source, we can simply type equals divisions, and then press Enter or OK. And you can see the dropdown works just fine. So let's do that again, except this time, rather than changing the data validation for just cell C6, let's change it for all the cells under the division column. So as before, I'm going to click on cell C6, then scroll down to the bottom of the spreadsheet, and then while holding the Shift key, I'll click on cell C30. Then I'll go back to data validation, either by going to the ribbon under the Data tab and selecting Data Validation, or by pressing Alt-A-V-V. Now, because cell C6 is currently using a named range and the other cells are still using a normal cell reference, Excel's giving us a warning that we are changing the data validation properties of multiple cells which contain different properties. To move on, you can simply click OK, because what we're saying is we don't care that we have different data validation properties in these different cells. We want to set up a data validation that will be consistent across all of them. So by pressing OK, you erase the current settings, and whatever you set here will apply to every cell you've selected. So as a reminder, under Allow, we want to select List, and for Source, rather than navigating to the Lists tab like we did before, we'll simply type equals divisions. And divisions is a named range, so when Excel sees this, it'll know which cells you're talking about, and it'll pull in your list of 3 divisions. And we can see it worked. By selecting any one of these cells and hitting the drop-down, we see those 3 options. Now let's go to the segment column. We want to set it up so that when you've selected a division, you can then click on the cell next to it for segment and see a drop-down of all the segments within that division. The first step is we need to create a new list for each division. We want to have a list of each of the aerospace segments, a list of each of the medical segments, and a list of each of the food segments. So let's go back to the Lists tab and create those 3 lists. First, let's set up the aerospace list. Here we have the list of divisions, and we've bolded the word divisions at the top of the list as the header, so we know what this list is for. We'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to paste the word aerospace, and I'm going to bold that, and then we'll list the aerospace segments beneath the word aerospace. Similar to before, we have that list already on the Summary tab, so I'll go ahead and copy and paste that over. I'll navigate to the Summary tab, I'll select all of the segments for aerospace, I'll copy them, return to the Lists tab, and then I'll paste them here. However, I'm going to use paste values because we have some different formatting on the Summary tab. We want to keep the Lists tab really clean without any special formatting, so I'm going to right-click and right here, click Paste Values. And then I'll double-click between columns F and G just to get the proper column width. Let's repeat those steps for medical and food. I'll copy medical over here, bold it, back to the Summary tab, select the 4 segments for medical, I'll paste values. This time I'll use the keyboard shortcut, Alt-E-S-V, enter. And then again I'll fix the width of the columns, copy food over, bold it, back to the Summary tab, copy all of the food segments, back to lists, paste values, and again, fix that column width. And before we move on, I'll do a little bit of formatting cleanup just to make this an easier spreadsheet to work with. First, I'll insert a column between columns E and F. And I want to make this just a small column to create some separation between the divisions and the segments. So I'll copy column D and paste it into column F. Similar to the months column, I'll highlight the divisions header. And I'll just make that kind of a darker gray. And then similarly, I'll highlight the headers for the segments. Again, I'll use that kind of darker gray. And I'll write segments over here just to make it clear that this section is for listing all of the segments. And to further the formatting, just to make it a little bit easier on the eyes, I'll select the headers and make them a lighter shade of gray, just to create some separation between the main header, we're talking about the segment section, to sort of the subheaders that lead each of the individual lists of segments. Now let's name each of these ranges. So let's select all of the segments beneath aerospace and navigate over to the name box here and type in aerospace. Then press enter. We've just created a named range called aerospace, which contains all of the segments within aerospace. Repeat that process for medical. So select all of the segments within medical, click on the name box, and type medical. Finally, repeat that process for food. Select all of the food segments, click on the name box, and type food. Now we've named each of our ranges. By the way, if you want to see your named ranges, you can click on the Formulas tab in the ribbon and then click on Name Manager. And you can see each of our named ranges. You can see what range they refer to and actually what values are currently included within that range. Using named ranges for data validation is useful for a couple of reasons. One, if you ever need to change the range that's included in a data validation, named ranges makes that easier. For example, let's say we have to add a new division. If we want to make sure that this newly added division is included in the drop-down menu, we need to update the list of cells included in the data validation. The normal way to do that would be to go back to the Input tab, select all of our cells that include the data validation, go back into data validation, and update this source to include that added division. Hit cancel. The problem with that method is that it adds an extra step to the process. Rather than simply updating the list of cells included in the data validation, I first need to know all of the cells which use that data validation, and I need to select all of them. So I need to select, as I showed before, C6 through C30. In this spreadsheet, that's not such a big deal, but you could be working with a workbook that has a lot more cells you would need to select. Using a named range makes it very easy. All you have to do is go into your name manager like we showed before, formulas, name manager, and then you simply update the division's name here by selecting divisions and then clicking this button right here. And now you can change that list. Once you update the list here, all of the cells using the data validation referring to the division's name, all of those cells will automatically be updated. So rather than having to select all of those cells, all I need to do is update the named range, and you can rest assured that the change will carry through to all those cells. Now I'm going to change this named range back to those original 3 divisions because that was just a quick example. And I'll get rid of that new division there. So let's go back to the input tab. In the segment column, essentially what we want to do, if I go into data validation again, and then I want to set allow to list, if the user has selected medical as the division, I want the source to be equals medical, because we have a named range called medical, which refers to all the segments within medical. Here I've typed equals medical as an example. I'll press OK, and you'll see that under segment, I can only select from the medical segments. However, if I change this division to aerospace, for example, you'll see that my segments are still just the medical segments. So let me go back into data validation. How do we set up the source so that it's equals medical when it needs to be, but if the user selects aerospace or food as the division, our source becomes the aerospace list or the food list? To accomplish that, we'll use a function called INDIRECT. I'm going to click Cancel here and show you how the INDIRECT function works. Navigate over to the INDIRECT example tab. The INDIRECT function takes a text string and treats it like a cell reference. For example, if we wanted to know what was contained in cell F13, you could use a direct cell reference. So for example, in cell D6, I'm going to enter equals F13. This is a basic cell reference, so when I press enter, Excel will show me the contents of cell F13. However, what if we wanted to set up some functionality where a user could enter any cell here in cell D4 and see what's contained within that cell? So I'd like to be able to enter I10, and then I would like to see the contents of cell I10 right here. So how do I do that? Well, right now in cell D4, we have a text string that simply says I10. If we were to treat that text string like a cell reference, then Excel would know to look in cell I10 and tell us what's contained within it. Well, that's exactly what the INDIRECT function does. So let's try it out. In cell D6, type equals INDIRECT, open parentheses, and then select cell D4, and then close parentheses. So what this formula is going to do is it'll check cell D4 for a text string, and it'll find in cell D4 we have the text string I10. The INDIRECT function will treat that text string like a cell reference. If you were to take I10 and treat that like a cell reference, then Excel would simply look in cell I10 and return the contents of that cell to us. So press enter, and you can see it did exactly that. And if I type in F13, it'll pull in the contents of cell F13. In this example, the INDIRECT function is not very useful, but it becomes incredibly powerful when you realize that a named range is nothing but a cell reference. So let's put that to use. navigate back to the Input tab. Then select all of the segment cells, so click on cell D6, then scroll down to the bottom of the spreadsheet, and while holding the Shift key, select cell D30. Then, as we did for the division column, navigate to the data validation function, so click on data, then data validation. We get this error that we saw before. Right now, cell D6 contains the data validation that we did as an example, but cells D7 and onward do not include any data validation. So again, Excel's just asking, do we want to make all of these cells consistent in terms of the data validation that they use? So you can click yes. Now, the way this spreadsheet is going to work is the user will first select a division in column C. In this case, in this example, they've selected aerospace in cell C6. So what are the contents of cell C6? We have a text string which says aerospace. What do we want column D to have, or cell D6 in this example? We want cell D6 to have a drop-down menu using the aerospace list. Well, remember, we have a list called aerospace, and named ranges are essentially cell references. So if we use the indirect function, we can take the aerospace text string and tell Excel to treat it like a cell reference, which in this case is a named range that contains the list we want Excel to use for this drop-down menu. So clear what we currently have in the source field, and then type equals indirect C6, and then close parentheses. So what this tells Excel to do is take a look at cell C6 and look for a text string. You will find the text string aerospace. Now, use the indirect function to treat that text string as a cell reference. When it does that, it'll find, hey, aerospace is a named range, and that named range contains a list. Let's use that list as our drop-down menu. So I'll go ahead and press OK, and now you can see when I click on the drop-down menu, I see all of the aerospace segments. And if I change that to the food division, for example, all of the segments are now the food segments. And that's because Excel is taking the text string from cell C6, treating it like a cell reference, so in this case it's finding that named range and pulling in everything from that named range into this segment's dropdown. You'll see this works for all the other cells as well. If I go to cell C7 and I select medical, then in the drop-down menu in cell D7, I can see the medical segments. I'll show you the reason that works. If you once again select all of the cells under the segment header, so click on cell D6, scroll down, hold the Shift key and select cell D30, then you can let go of Shift. I'll navigate back into data validation. When you select a collection of cells and enter data validation, whatever you enter in this source field will be treated as the source for the first cell in your selection. So this says that for cell D6, I want you to look at the text string in cell C6. However, this is only the source for the first cell in this selection. For all of the other cells in this selection, Excel will act as though we've taken this source and copied and pasted it all the way down. If you're familiar with cell references, you'll know that if I have C6 in my first cell, as I copy and paste it down, that 6 will update as we move down. So in my first cell, I'm looking at cell C6. But if I paste that into the cell below, I'll be looking at cell C7. And you can prove that to yourself by hitting cancel. And then rather than selecting all of the cells, just select one of them. So for example, click on cell D9. Then navigate back to data validation, and you can see that as the source, it's using cell C9 rather than cell C6. Now I'll hit cancel to get back to the input tab. And now you have dynamic dropdowns that depend on one another. You can test it out and see that it should work across all the cells on this spreadsheet. For example, I can come down to cell C14, select aerospace, and then see in cell D14 that I have all of the aerospace segments available. You can even get more complicated, and let's say within each segment you had products. You could insert a third column that has a drop-down list which depends on the segments column, and on and on. And if you ever had to add additional divisions or additional segments, you can do that by listing those divisions or segments on the Lists tab and going back into Formula's Name Manager to update these ranges to include any added divisions or segments. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up, so if you have any questions on this process, leave those in the comments and I'll be happy to address them. Or if you have any other topics you'd like to see me cover in Excel, let me know and I'll be happy to do so on this channel. And if you found this video helpful, please go ahead and click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified the next time we release a video. Thanks for watching.